Hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today for today's webinar. The topic is Learn what the new Digital Government Initiative means to your web strategy. So the webinar should last about 45 minutes, and we will be doing a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Please feel free to use the chat window to ask questions, and we will try to get to all of them by the end of the presentation. For those of you who would like to see the slides and video recording, we will have that posted on www.percussion.com by tomorrow morning. So without further ado, I would like to present Vern Imrich, Percussion CTO.
Hi everybody, thanks Karen and to all the team that put together the logistics for the event. And I just want to say this is an area I've been working with the federal government now and through several of our major clients in that sector for quite some time. I'm very excited to be talking to you about this new digital government strategy and what it means for you. And so without further ado, we'll dive in, and I'll tell you a little bit more about myself and who we are and where we come from first, just almost really by way of disclaimer. We're going to not really be spending a whole lot of time today on Percussion or our products. It's really not the focus of today's presentation, but certainly, you know, we have been in the working with a lot of the clients that you're going to see examples of today. We're going to focus a lot on how people are meeting the goals outlined in the federal digital strategy. So there's some of those at the bottom, and we've been doing this for over 10 years now in this space, and that includes me personally working with many of the sites and some of the examples that you'll see. So if you're interested more in this later, it's definitely something we can help you with, you know, by going to percussion.com. You'll see some of our contacts later. But for the rest of the presentation, let's really focus in on what this new digital strategy means for you. What are some of the key goals and objectives that you now face in order to meet the requirements of that strategy? So first things first, what is the digital government strategy? Well, it's got a longer title than that, you know, the 21st century platform to better serve the American people, all of that boilerplate there. I recommend you read it. We're not going to spend a whole heck of a lot of time reviewing what you can go and read on your own. But suffice to say, it breaks down into 4 key areas that are outlined over here on the left. The first thing is that we need to move to a model where we are, quote, information-centric. We think about content first. This is a little bit different. It's kind of the next evolution. You know, we had a period where we were thinking we need to think online first. Well, now we need to go beyond even that and think about content first and not just putting up a website or posting some information online. So we'll talk about what that means for your strategy. Shared platform is a critical part of this. How do we really ultimately lower the barriers to adoption by learning and sharing with each other here in the federal sector, in particular, the different technologies that we're using. A key change also is to be customer-centric. This is right from the document there, which is that it matters how usable it is, how easy is it for your constituents and customers and patrons and so on to find your information that you have online. That's a key metric related to this. And then finally, security and privacy. It does matter how people are going to get at information and how you can provide it in such a way that still complies with the requirements in these areas. So that's the high-level goal we're trying to do. What does that really boil down to when it's time to talk about your specific web strategy, or more generally your online strategy? Today, you know, web is used to cover everything from mobile to different devices, different interaction modes and mediums, and we just all kind of use the term web for that, and this document does certainly as well. But some of the key things here, some of them have been around a while, some of them are new, and some of them take old concepts and really replay them to a new end or to a new degree. So first thing first is you got to think about content independently of how it's presented. People are using different devices, different interaction norms, so they're on mobile devices, they're coming through different online channels, they have different dial-up connectivities. It's almost an odd thing to think about, but you've got different folks in different areas. Not everybody's on the latest, greatest smartphones. Some of them are, some are not. So you've got those kinds of things to think about when it comes to presentation. and we'll spend some time talking about that. Another key area is tagging information. Having the information itself indicate to the consumer what it's about, which is this term semantic. Semantic just is a fancy term for meaning. How meaningful is your content? So if I didn't get it from the context of a static published site somewhere, if I got it through all these other channels or different interaction modes, does it still mean something to me? Can I use the tags to find it more effectively in the first place? Maybe I didn't know where to go. And so this is all about improving the meaningfulness of the sharing of the information. Okay. Another key thing is measuring and monitoring and changing how you deliver content to maximize the experience that your constituents have with the information. It's no longer enough to simply publish information. It's out there. That used to be the goal back in day one of the Obama presidency was the Open Government Initiative. And we did a webinar back then in 2008, and it was that was the first step. You just have to be open. Put up a /open page, get the data out there. Well, this is taking it to the next step. So it's not enough to just be open and have it be published somewhere. It has to actually be usable, findable, and so on. So we'll spend some time talking about this. And then mobile. Everybody is talking about mobile, and it's because it's well beyond the fad stage. Half of you probably sitting there looking at your mobile device right now, and the other half hoping that you have time to later. But we're all engaging in that in some way or the other. And so we're going to talk about what it means to have coverage for your information from a mobile context. Okay, and we're going to spend a lot of time going through specific examples in each of these areas and make it real for you. So let's talk about separating content from presentation. And this is something that has been a hallmark of the industry that we're in, the content management industry, for many years. And there's multiple layers, though, of picking apart what does this mean to separate content from presentation, or more generally, information from presentation. And in a traditional content management system, pretty much all of them that have been around, where the key kind of core concept embedded in this is that I ought to be able to do reading of the content separately from editing. So if you look at any of your traditional content management platforms that do this, you have a single content model that is used, and you can separate content editing, meaning I can log in, if I have the right permissions, I log into a site, and I can be an editor, and I can change the information. And if you haven't used the CMS, go to Wikipedia and click the edit button in the corner and kind of give you some flavor of what that looks like. And this is the traditional approach that all CMSs have taken. It's, quote, single sourcing, single content model that works for me as an editor or an author, but also works for the viewer reading the site. Okay? Now, the challenge here is while that separated the content from the format, from the presentation, I can be in edit mode or read mode, it still coupled the experience together. It tended to lead towards this all-encompassing approach, which it works great for everybody as long as everybody uses the same system. All that single sourcing of content means there's a single repository, there's a single system that owns the keys to the whole kingdom. And the challenge with that is it tends to lead to a model where you're effectively boiling the ocean. Everything is great as long as everybody agrees to all use the same system. And this is true of a lot of the major commercial CMSs, certainly a lot of the open source CMSs. You can see a lot of energy about, hey, we all should just get on the same system, and somehow that will solve everything. Where we're going is really towards a model where we're not simply decoupling the content from the presentation, we're also decoupling the whole system, the content management system, from the presentation. And in a decoupled content management system, yes, the content is still separate. You edit it based on how it appears, and not based on, not on how it appears, but based on what it is. So you edit it in some kind of a semantically meaningful fashion. This is the title, this is text, and so on. But the key difference is you get the content as soon as you're done. You get it out of the content management system. It's not holding the keys to the kingdom. And you think about this more like you think of a multi-node network where you're physically publishing it to anybody else who wants to be a participant. So you might publish it once as a web page to your web server. That web server doesn't have to be part of the content management system, though. You might publish it again as a syndication feed or even a simple RSS feed. And again, let other people take hold of the content. This is going to get the content out and decoupling it from the presentation. So we're now starting to think about presentation not simply as formatting a website or a web page, you're thinking about presentation as who controls access to the information. And your goal and the mandate of the strategy is best aligned with get the information out there. Make it so that people don't have to come to your site to get at it. And let's see some examples of this. Well, the next generation is going even beyond some of these syndication technologies to much more general, make it available as a data feed. And the key formats for the technologists out there that are common today is the XML or the JavaScript object or JSON format. And these make the content available as, quote, data through some kind of web API. This is the kind of technology that's underpowering all of the major services that we use today, from social things like Facebook and Twitter to Google mashups and all these other things, where basically I don't have to go to Google to have options on my site. I don't have to go to Twitter. I can put a badge on my site to get at that kind of information. And again, the key concept here is you have all the systems are equal participants. So your own system delivering your own content on your site is an equal participant to somebody else using your content or accessing your content. And this is really the next generation of this concept of separating content from presentation. So let's take a look at one example from our field experience with this, which is the flu.gov site. So I took some screenshots, both of the site today, but also how it was a few years back, because as we know, a few years ago there was the H1N1 or the swine flu outbreak scare, however you want to label that. It was a big topic, and it was a great example of what it means to get content out where people can get at it. Not everybody necessarily knew that there's a site called flu.gov. People who didn't really normally care about the flu suddenly really cared a whole heck of a lot. Well, so the first thing you got to do is cover all the different mediums of interaction that people want to have. And this is that first concept that we're talking about. Get the content out separate from the formatting. So you need a site like this, traditional kind of web pages and informational articles, but you also need to go to things like RSS feeds. And so all that information was available through a feed here. Just as an example, it's kind of hard to show because most of you probably use a feed reader, but here's an example if you just hook into your Google and look at the feed version of their site. They also were using more socially friendly channels like blogs. So you may say, well, I've already got an article about this information. But if you blog about it, it tends to be a little bit more personal. People will tend to cross-link back to blog posts about articles more than they will about the article itself. Bloggers tend to be people. Blogs tend to be more human. And so it's, again, another way of covering that information channel. Somebody's going to put a link on their Facebook page to your information. It's far more likely they're going to cross-link back to a blog post than they are about a boilerplate article. It just feels more natural to them. So you got to cover that channel. Rich media is huge, particularly now with the different devices supporting this. A lot of folks would rather watch something, visual, audio, what have you, and rather than read. Particularly if you're on a smaller device, this kind of media coverage can be important. Okay, and then that covers some of the media channels. But then longer term, the other key thing that happened though is thinking about getting this information off of your site. And one of the key things that flu.gov implementation did was make it so that you could get at flu information. Where were those all-important vaccinations going? Were there enough of them? Where are they available? And well, you can come to flu.gov and find that, or we can make it so you can put this flu vaccine locator on your site. And so they built this badge. You could actually go to the flu.gov site, simply copy this little magic chunk of HTML, drop it into your site. If you're a webmaster or a blogger, or you can drop it into your social pages, what have you, and let people find that information from wherever they are. So now you've got state, local, all these different other nonprofits and others that could use this information. And then you can also do things like there's the second half of the screen, match this up with Google Maps at the time. They've since updated this, by the way, the screenshot, and a couple of others are back from that period where this was a really hot topic. And it just gives you an example of the adaptability and change, where now I don't have to go to the .gov site to get at this information. I'm actually pushing it out there. And it's just one nice example of them doing that. So let's move on so now we've seen that we want to separate content from presentation, cover all our mediums, and most importantly, decouple it or get it off your own site if you can. That's really the next generation where everything's going. Make it so that anybody can use your content even on their site. Okay. So, well, how do you start to really make that available? Because when it's on your site, well, your site design, your navigation structure, that'll tell people how they want to use it. When the content could be anywhere, it really becomes important to use what's called semantic tagging or metadata more generally. Because when people want to share the information, it may not be in a design that you control, and so you're going to want to label the information so people can use it. So let's talk about what that means today. So the first thing to understand is what do we mean by using metadata or tagging more generally. Tags is just a fancy way of saying we're labeling content. Okay, and how this works in a system is typically you go into some area where you're entering the content, you highlight some of the content, and you tag it a certain way. We're all used to doing this. Typically, though, we're used to doing this for presentation. So we tend to tag things in order to make it look like something. So we'll go into some text, and we'll highlight it, and we'll tag it with a paragraph tag, or we'll highlight it with an image or a link or something like that. And this is kind of what we're used to historically with these various editing tools that we've been using. Some cases, even forums will let you tag things. If you've got a blog, you've gone in there and added some of these types of tags. And there are key languages for that. HTML defines the tags, and then these various CSS classes define style tags, basically things like left nav or bold or some of these other variations on that can be done in that styling layer. And that's kind of where the tagging has been for many years, but where we're going and what this digital strategy really requires is to think about tagging from a semantic standpoint. And semantic, all that really boils down to is the tag is telling you what does this mean? Who wrote it? What is it about? When was it written? You know, all of those who, what, when, where, why, and how kind of questions are what semantic tags do. So, well, we can all agree once on presentation. There's only one thing in the world called a paragraph. There's only one, you know, element for an image and things like that. And so for HTML and CSS, when we're dealing with presentation, you just learn it once and do it. Maybe just use the right kind of text editor, and you're done. Well, when it comes to semantics, there's a lot of different ways to describe meaning. Just go to a library. There's topical categories, things like history, nonfiction, fiction, things like that. And so the key challenge for semantic tagging is how do we agree on what terms to use? How do we, you know, do we use abbreviations and acronyms, or do we use the full terms, all this kind of stuff? And this is where folks have put a lot of effort into something known as a taxonomy. And a taxonomy is just a way of controlling the choices, the vocabulary that you get to use when you tag something. And this becomes really important, as most of you in the federal sector know, you've got mountains of information. And it's really important to think about how you're going to classify it, categorize it, so that it can be found more effectively, so that it can be shared. Key thing to understand is all of the technologies that you need are already available, and they're already in use today. So you don't have to go out and pioneer some standard for sharing terms or sharing taxonomies or defining all of that and employing it. You simply need to know how to make use of it today in your site. So the first thing is, how do I make the information available to the consumer? And you can actually do this even without something fancy like XML or some of these other data feeds. You can go right into HTML pages today and use a tagging mechanism known as RDFA as a standard as part of the semantic web work that W3C and others have been working on. And what it does is simply use an existing HTML tag known as the meta tag and some other conventions, and allows you to put something in the page. So I've got a little sample here of if you wanted to say that this page was created on a certain date, you might put in a tag like you see here where it says, or it uses this HTML meta tag, and that's telling the world now this is when this page was created. Probably a lot of you might even have these kinds of tags on your site, although they're probably not full-on RDFA. But here's the really cool part. Once you put RDFA tags like this in your page, all of these other systems in the world, think of that multi-node picture that we had a few slides back when we were talking about decoupling, they all now can have mechanisms that crawl your site and look for these tags and say, hey, I want to get only new content. Well, now they've got a way to do it, even if you didn't set up an RSS feed, even if you didn't put it into a syndication engine. Okay? And so the more of these tags you can get into your content, the better. But if you want to go one step further, and get beyond simply people crawling web pages with these tags embedded into them, then you can use XML, which has, again, been around for over a decade. It's an area that has been our technological expertise here at Percussion for just all of that time as well. And this is where you can start doing dedicated modes of displaying or really presenting or making your information available. And one of the oldest and most familiar XML formats out there was RSS, which most of us are familiar with. We've had feed readers and know about RSS feeds. There's the browser. That's an XML markup language specifically for syndicating or sharing content. But more generally now, people are kind of taking that finally to the next level here with this concept of web APIs. And web APIs are something you've used if you've ever gone to a site and you've seen a Twitter badge on the side and showing you your latest tweet. That badge is powered by web APIs. Twitter and Facebook have APIs that let you say things, let you ask for, give me the latest status updates from a particular person, or give me the latest results from a certain feed, or give me all the tweets that match a certain hashtag. All that content is available through these web APIs. And the lingua franca, the way that all that information is exchanged is through XML or its JavaScript cousin known as JSON. The other key thing is this all is what's undergirding these rich Internet applications. So when you see sites, whether it's through your mobile device or whether it's just in a standard desktop browser, and there's information populating in the page, even though you didn't really do anything, it came in after while you're reading the page, or if the site is really heavily into rich media, it's got galleries, it's got other effects, it's got click-over effects, mashups between maps and other information. This XML is what powers all of that. So if you want to cross-pollinate like the flu.gov site did just a second ago and show where the shots are, the flu shots are on a map, it's the XML for the map that's coming down, it's the XML for the flu shot feed that's coming down, and the rich Internet app is combining them together. Okay. So one example of the importance of tagging is at the Centers for Disease Control. And to give you an idea of just how important this can become, they have something like 10,000 possible choices in their taxonomy, in their control vocabulary. So you or I may think of cancer as a tag. Well, that's only the beginning for somebody like the CDC. They've got hundreds of values just in that area. And so it's a kind of an area where you go, so how does this realize? What does this do? So if you look at their topics pages, I mean, they have so many tags, they need to give you an index just to start working through the tag values there. So here on the bottom left, you can see an example of that. And so they have whole mechanisms just for helping the editorial team tag information more effectively. How do I find a tag? So I know it's about cancer, but which of the 100 possible ones might it be? And there's quite a bit there that you need to think about in terms of making it easy to tag things. This is not something we've been used to doing as editors and authors. We're typically used to how does it look? Okay, because we're visual, that's how humans think. But you're now tagging it so that you can decide someone else is going to want it. And if I'm dealing with a certain institute or a certain nonprofit and they want to share our information, they may only want it in some specific sub-area that you have. So this is a good example of some of that, and also a good pointer to some of the folks who have massive amounts of information. CDC's got millions of content articles and content items in their system, and so it becomes really important in terms of how you organize this and tag this. All right, so you've got your content now separated from your format, and you're starting to think about how do I get it so that anybody can get at this content. I don't have to have them all go channeling into my site and all in one giant system. I can syndicate it out. I can get it off my site and make and tag it so anybody can get at it. Well, then the web experience requirement kicks in. And let's think a little bit about what it means to have a great web experience. And one of the ways I like to walk people through this is most of us have been around for the last 10 years or so. Remember when the internet was going to change everything? You know, and it did. But, you know, the information superhighway and all of that, you know, that was going to be the big change. And it did. And then, of course, well, you know, Netscape was going to change everything. And, well, no, not Netscape. IE, Information, Internet Explorer. That's going to change it. Microsoft finally got the internet. Remember that? And that was going to change everything. The OS didn't matter anymore. It was all about the, you know. And then guess what? Well, no, it's not about the browser. It's about the portal. Remember when search engines were still called portals? It's a Yahoo, man. You got to get yourself on Yahoo, and then, now we laugh or whatever. Yahoo's kind of revisited themselves. It's all Google now, all Google PageRank. Well, then again, no, you know what, SEO, it's about social. It's MySpace. We all laugh about MySpace. I think it's basically teenagers in their vans these days. But back in the day, that was big. And then Facebook came out and changed everything again. So you just can't even keep up. And no matter which you pick, it keeps changing. I remember, mobile. I remember when mobile was flat phones and the Palm Pilot. It's almost like you smile. Think about when you were hot with your new Palm OS. And now with BlackBerry's even seemingly dated. And then the iPhone and Android. You can battle that out. So that changes everything. And, well, now clouds come into play. Maybe you don't need to run your own web servers anymore. Maybe you can just get it out of the cloud service, and that's going to make everything available. And the digital strategy talks about this unique new confluence of mobile and cloud. Well, they got the fact that that's a key driver, correct? But I think they maybe glossed over a little bit about how this has been constantly new. There's never been a period where we can finally say, well, at last we've now settled in. We now know it's this phone, it's this cloud, it's this. It's going to keep going. The iPad came out, changed everything on top of the phone, and so on and so forth. And it really doesn't matter where you look. Google Plus just this year changed SEO for everybody. Okay, Pinterest was nowhere. Now it's one of the hottest things ever. Instagram, things you've never heard of. And so the key message here is no matter what you think you know about the web today, it's going to change so much that you're going to be laughing about it. Not, unfortunately, 2 years from now, maybe as quick as 6 months from now or 18 months from now. And so the message here is that if you want a good web experience, if you just go back 2 bullets on any one of these areas, you're going to be behind. And this is very different. I can't stress this enough. You can plan what your own agency or department is going to be doing. You can't plan what Apple's going to do with the iPad. You can't plan for what Google's going to do with Google Plus or the search engines. These are external forces that are imposed on you by the way the market works. And so what do we do about this? Well, in the Fed, it's not like change is always a bad thing. So how do we adapt to this? This can be an opportunity. This can be an area of hope here. So that's my one little nod to the DC crowd there. But so let's talk about what it means to have constituent service. What it first means is service, high quality service ultimately means you have to think that you can't know for sure what they're going to want where, and you're going to have to be able to adapt to that kind of constant change. So having a really great mobile site for a BlackBerry, you're suddenly going to be behind when the iPad drops. Having really great search engine optimization for Google last year is totally different than it is for this year. So the key thing to think about is agility. Okay? You can plan your internal stuff. So if you're the CDC, back a couple slides, you can plan how you want to tag your content. Absolutely. Put a ton of time into that. But when you get to presenting it, that's external. You need to think about adapting constantly. The good news is if you guess wrong, it won't matter. But the bad news is if you guess right, it won't last that long either. This is a high rate of change. Your success lifespan is typically measured in months, not years. And so you need to constantly be thinking, try something. If it works, great. Run with it. Go with it for a few months. And if it doesn't, do the next thing. And the key thing that you need to think about when it comes to agility is lowering the entry costs. If it takes you 6 months to plan, code, develop, and release some kind of new module on your site, by the time you get that done, the web is going to have moved on and done some other thing. And so it's critical to lower the cost of adopting these types of different presentation norms going forward. The other key thing you need to do is analyze and monitor what's happening. Because, again, success isn't going to last, neither is failure. So you want to use analytics. And once again, like a lot of the technologies in here, there's free analytics out there. Google has a great analytics offering. There's others that are free as well. And you can use that to measure where people are going. Measure it by device, measure it by where the traffic's coming from. Is it the feed? Is it the site? And what have you. And also your channels. As I said earlier, you tend to get more informal, social-driven inbounds through things like your blog or rich media. but that may not be everything you want to cover. You do also care about who's downloading your official policy documents and things like that. So you're going to want to track that. Maybe you're not cross-linking them enough, and you can see those flows through into your site by tracking where it is you're posting information. The key thing that you need to do, though, to combine, once you're monitoring things and you're trying to be agile, is you have to think in interchangeable parts. So the days where you could custom build and say, well, here's how our business works, and we're going to spend months defining it and get around conference room tables and talk about how our business is going to work, and then we're going to take that all to the web, that's just not fast enough. And that, again, will work for your internal stuff. You can do that. But for the external presentation side, you have to think in terms of reusing existing, off-the-shelf, interchangeable parts. You see this today with some of the major social channels. Everything's gone to a mashup model. And a mashup is just a fancy way of taking blocks of stuff, widgets that are already out there, like that flu.gov badge or the Twitter widget or some Google mashup capability, mixing that in with what you've already got. And this is going to really get to the next stage. Today, I think a lot of folks are thinking about the initial development cost. So there's a lot of focus on code sharing. I write a module, can I post it somewhere, and we can all share it. And a lot of the open source communities have done a great job of enabling that. But we really have to get to the next stage where I'm not sharing code. I don't write a module for Twitter. I just grab the API and use it and deploy it right on my site. That's really the next generation. That's the model that we have to think about in terms of being able to keep up with this kind of web rate of change and ultimately provide the kind of constituent services we need. So I drag and drop it in. I make a change. It lasts for 2 months. Great. I drag and drop it in something else because something new just came out down the road, and I don't have to think about trying to find a module, downloading it, adding it to my system, customizing it to how we work, and all of that. So kind of key phrases here. A lot of marketers use this phrase, fail fast, which basically means if it ain't going to work, I want to know right away. Lower my cost of entry, and then know. And again, it's not a big deal if it doesn't work. If it took you an hour to drop in a widget, try it for 3 days, and then decide to move on. Okay, and then if it does work, well, rinse and repeat, right? Hey, we set up a new channel, or we started blogging about things we never used to blog about. Great, let's try to blog about other stuff, and just keep that going. And again, think about in terms of prepackaged, interchangeable pieces and services that you can just use, as opposed to defining modules, figuring out how you're going to use them, writing code, right, getting in there and customizing it. Shared code is only going to take you so far in terms of getting you to be fast enough and ultimately low cost enough to do this kind of agility. And again, the message to the management side is you can't predict what the ROI is going to be. You don't know who's going to come at your content one way or the other. And no amount of upfront studying is going to tell you, because even if you get it right, it's going to change. You couldn't predict what Apple's going to do next, unless maybe you've got some inroads with them. Certainly between them, Google, all these other channels, something's going to happen that you can't possibly know about. So if you adopt agility in interchangeable pieces and just dragging and dropping and mashing things up together, that's really the only way you can possibly manage to improve your constituent service with your content. All right, so now we are decoupled, and we are tagging everything so services can use it. And we're thinking in terms of interchangeable pieces that just drag and drop into the systems, and I don't really have to be a technologist, and I don't have to sit around and come up with project plans and schedules because it's only going to last for a few weeks or months anyways before I do some new thing, and I'm moving into that model. The other thing we have to think about here is mobile specifically. And mobile is in some sense the culmination of all of these different things coming together. And the key thing that's going on with mobile is we're starting to think about it not as some separate, exotic other thing, but as a co-equal participant in all of our design challenges and all of the way we think about content. So the latest newest thing in mobile is something called responsive design. This is actually mentioned in the digital strategy. And it means different things to different people depending on how technical you are. So if you're a CSS person, we'll talk about that in a minute. But ultimately what this means is that you have a single design paradigm that covers all the devices. So you don't think about the website design and then, oh, later, okay, well, how are we going to do mobile? Okay, and so the key thing about responsive design is it takes into account that there's going to be different form factors. And when those are, when you're on a tablet or when you're on a phone, you can see less at one time, and so it's going to think about the presentation differently in those different areas. Now, there is a technical side of responsive design, And there's probably even some debate in the community about what it counts, what you have to do in order to, quote, really be responsive. But the key technologies work today. This is not something we have to wait for some committee to go out and prove something. Okay, the key technologies under responsive design for a technologist are HTML5 and CSS3. All the major browsers, the most recent versions support this today. You don't need to wait. And also, they gracefully degrade. So if somebody does hit your site on IE6 or something like that, it's going to gracefully still kind of work the right way. Well, maybe not IE6, because that's pretty awful, but at least IE7 and some of the other ones. Not even Microsoft supports IE6 anymore. So, all right. So what does this mean? It means that you can start deploying these technologies today just by how you do your design, which is typically done independent of any CMS you use. You just decide we're going to use CSS3 or we're going to use some of these HTML5 tags, and that's going to let us do this. But again, if you talk to a designer, they're going to say, well, you know, responsive design has nothing to do with HTML5 and CSS3. It has to do with, did somebody bother to think about what this site's going to look like on these different devices? And so really that's where we get into this last point, is think about the device context. If I'm on a tablet, well, I could be in an office, I could be somewhere else, I could be sitting on my couch. Well, okay, if I'm on a phone, chances are I might be in my car, I might be walking the streets, trying to find your office location. And so the context in which you use these different devices, not just the form factor, defines different priorities for information. So when I'm truly mobile, I'm actually out and about moving around, tasks or actionable things tend to be more important, like let me find a location. I'm trying to get to your event that you're holding today, or so things like directions and office locations, or quick things I can do. Yeah, let me subscribe really quickly. Just by clicking this button, I don't want to forget about it, do it later, so let me do it right from my phone where I have to see the news alert. That tends to drive more, whereas if you're on a larger form factor, you might want to just relax and read for a while. Another key thing is that always with mobile, newest is best. New information is top priority. Okay? If they have time to go back in and go learn a new topic for the first time ever, chances are that's a lower priority item. That's when you're sitting at your desk and these kinds of things. When you're on mobile, you're on the go, you're moving. The latest is always the most important. And so the key is back to that semantic tagging that we talked about earlier. It's really important here to tag information so that the design can respond to it and say, well, hey, everything that's newer is more important than just general purpose informational, discovery in the context of other aspects of browsing the site. So what I want to do is take you through two different ways of looking at this responsive design, and they're actually the same site. So Aids.gov a few years ago launched a site specifically with tablets, smartphones, and older phones, which, by the way, by percentage, older phones like BlackBerries and others are still something like 70% of coverage, particularly global coverage. And so if you've got folks spread across the world, you really don't want to ignore some of the, well, they're not dumb phones, but they're not as smart as some of the newest smartphones. So what they did in their design model was think about a design that would work in all of these areas. Now, they didn't deploy this version that you're looking at now with HTML5 and CSS3. They did it with some of the older stuff that looked at device detection and that. But the design is still what I would call, and a lot of designers would still call, as responsive. And if you look at a typical responsive design mock-up, you'll see typically 3 versions, the main one for your desktop, something in the middle, a bigger smartphone or a tablet, and then something smaller, form factor even than that. And you can see some of the aspects. The coloring is the same, even though the order isn't exactly the same. So if you came to one, you're not totally thrown off by going to the other. But certain elements change. You have, for example, navigation tends to use up the whole area up here in the top on the left in the desktop mode, whereas once you move to a tablet or some of the larger smartphones, it moves to a more compact menuing structure because you just don't have the real estate to do that. It tends to be more of a one thing at a time paradigm on a phone where you can see lots of things here all at once. News and information is still critical, but it's also, again, it's not jarring. You see the same kind of image, smaller size, and so on. The same basic information is just more compact, more verticalized. And then down to the older phones like a BlackBerry, it's just the news and nothing else. Thank you very much. I can't really do a whole lot, so just show me the latest news and updates. At least I can do that. I might have the occasional action like the ability to type in something to search for it or something like that. Okay, so there's a responsiveness in this design in the sense that as a design agency and as a owner of this information, as an operating division, you can make sure that all these different areas are covered. But then there's the latest technological approach. So this approach required you to have device detection, required them to do that. The latest is actually, if I can pause for a moment and go to my browser, they recently redid this with the new responsive design technical approach with HTML5 and CSS3. I'm just going to wait for a moment here as that catches up for you. So here's the new look. Also, it's just updated for the new look and feel. And one of the hallmarks of responsive design to a technologist is you can grab the bottom corner of the screen and resize it and see immediately how the design will change. So I'm going to start making this a little bit smaller. You'll see things start to shrink in, and at some point when I reach critical mass here like I just did, here I'm going to wait for that to catch up here on your screens just in case. As that scrolls in, that top nav banner suddenly shrunk from 6 or however many entries it was to that single menu drop list that you're seeing on the slide. And the bottom part of the screen went from being multi-column to single column. So this is responsive both from the designer's perspective, meaning I thought through it, but also from the implementer's perspective, meaning all I have to do is one HTML and one CSS set of markup, and that way when you come in on a tablet and it's shrunken the screen down to this much, or a smartphone versus coming in on a desktop, I don't need to worry about even doing things like device detection and some of the other capabilities. The reason I'm showing you both, though, is if they're on an older phone or if they're still on a more restricted bandwidth connection, some of these older approaches, like device detection and actually limiting what's in the payload, as it were, that you're delivering to the browser, is still going to matter, just because it's going to improve page load to performance. And again, ultimately, this is all about constituent success. So whether or not you adopt this approach from a technical perspective, you also always want to be thinking about any new design from this standpoint of content first and making sure it's taking into account the different form factors that folks are going to be using to see this. And make sure that nothing's sort of the lonely stepchild that didn't get covered well by the design. Okay, so let's go into a little bit of a wrap-up where we are, and then we'll take some questions. So once again, this is all about thinking about content, not about you as the owner of the content. That means decoupling your systems rather than this sort of boil the ocean. Hey, if we can all agree to just use the same platform I use, whether it's some open source thing or somebody else's, some vendor's platform, that's just never going to keep up. What you need to be thinking about is how do I get this content out into the world, regardless of whether you come to my site. And things like open APIs, distributing content out to syndication networks, getting it off your site is critical. To do that well, you need to think about customer service and constantly changing the information, okay, which means tagging it semantically, monitoring it, and looking it up. But it also means thinking in terms of interchangeable parts, mashing this up. That's going to really be much faster than attempting to rewrite new code, even if you're getting it from a code share network somewhere or a code community of other developers. That's just never going to keep up with the kind of rate of change that you need for the web adoption. Other key point is all the technologies that you need to do this kind of thing, they're proven. They're today. They're not some future new thing. Semantic tagging has been around a while. Analytics is available. There's a lot of free services out there like Google. Syndication standards have been there, and obviously mobile devices are now out for several years, so we're not in a lot of that churn phase. It's just a question of how do we go to really that interchangeable, let me try to move, and so that I don't have to do a whole new code development projects to get at that. Fundamentally, what are the barriers? Why aren't we already doing it if it's already out there today? And all of the barriers are about the cost and the complexity of trying to do any of this stuff, which fundamentally comes down to the ongoing services, the implementation services, and the maintenance costs. The initial upfront development work's already been done. Okay, it's simply how do I take it and make it available for myself. And this is certainly a large area where our focus is as a vendor is to say, how do we make it so that you can just grab this stuff now, drop it in, and use it and go, and not have to worry about all these things I just went through, and certainly not have to be the first one in your agency or department to worry about that that kind of information. So what I'll do now is I want to leave you with some of our ways to connect and stay connected with us. This is the first of a whole series of materials that we're delivering this webinar, but we'll have papers and a digital strategy landing page and other places that will follow this. So this is the beginning of the conversation, and so I want to make sure you have our contact information to help you through this. And then what I'd like to do also is take a look at some of the questions that have come in here during the presentation, and also say if you've got any questions now, because of the nature of the webinar, we use the chat mechanism there and GoToMeeting. It's there in the bottom right of your GoToMeeting screen, and you can type in those, and we'll have the moderator take a look at the questions here, and we'll get you the answers.
All right, thank you, Vern. So we had a large number of participants today, and a few questions came through, so I'd like to take the next few minutes and tackle them. The first one we have here is we're hearing a lot about HTML5, CSS3, and responsive design as a way to solve our mobile challenge. Is that enough, or do we need to go build an app too?
Okay, great. So I think there's two parts to that. There's this question about mobile-friendly website and responsive design and apps, but then there's also kind of wrapped up in there is HTML5 and CSS3 sort of the answer. Well, look, it's a big part of the answer, but one of the reasons I like to show the earlier version of the Aids.gov site is just slapping in some CSS3 to your site isn't going to make it mobile. You need to think about the design implications. The design implications are really what kind of information should come up first, how much information is too much for a different device, platform, and so on. And then once you've got through that, now you kick in with HTML5 and CSS3. The apps piece of that is another important way to think about it. It's another way, really, I think about mobile apps the same way I think about the whole decoupling of the information. Get the content off your site and into an app, and then folks can make use of that. That's really supported by the use of those web APIs and tagging and making it available through some of these other data channels. Okay.
Okay, great. We had another one come in. This question states, we are not currently using a CMS as we haven't felt like we needed one before. How should we think about getting started with the CMS?
Okay, great. So I think the first thing you want to do, or we recommend doing when you look at it, is, well, obviously as a vendor, but we have a specific set of criteria that we like to walk people through. So you want to think about the scope of what you're working on, the budget, the time frame, the cost, and all of that typically first. There's a lot of great technologies out there, and they're typically not about the technological platform. It's really about what are your barriers. Why haven't you already adopted a CMS? And most of the time, it's because of the cost and complexity. So the key thing that we like to do is make sure you're looking at a CMS that fits what your own implementation costs are, what your overall commitment is to the project. And the direction that we've seen from a lot of folks on trying to get started is there some way you can help us get rid of the dependency on having to have a highly trained staff of web developers to administer the system. And so we strongly recommend go give it a try. So one of the things that we've done this year is launch an evaluation process where you can actually go in and see what it's like to run this thing and not just sort of use it as an end-user contributor, but actually run your system, build your system. So we recommend that as a starting off point. Also, if there's anybody here, I think we might have a few from some of our government clients already. We have enterprise agreements already in place at a lot of these departmental agency-level sites where you may be able to take advantage of that automatically, including the community support, sharing of existing information, as well as the actual upfront licensing.
Okay, one more here, Vern. Tell me more about decoupling content from presentation to make content more shareable. How do we build an API with our content? Who would consume it?
Okay. So the key thing on using APIs for content is really two parts to this. One is tagging the information. That's definitely a key part of that. So that's going to make the information meaningful. And the next thing is thinking about how do we make the content queryable to the world. So I want to write something that calls a service. That's what that API really is. It's a service that says I can return for you content for that. And one of the things we've done in the Percussion content management landscape here that we service is we make all of the content that you publish available through these delivery APIs. So you can do things like give me all the content that's tagged a certain way. There's an API built in for that. And if you look at the healthcare.gov site, it's probably the one I didn't cover here. It's a great example of how those services, those APIs are being consumed. Now, they're being consumed in the context of that actual website. So when you click a category value or when you click something like blog, those delivery APIs are there serving content directly. But those APIs could be hit from anywhere to make the content available. So the other thing you can do is publish dedicated APIs. So we have these out-of-the-box ones. Simply by tagging things, they're going to be available. But you can also publish feeds for your information. So we have both the RSS, but also syndication networks, where you can simply share your content out into these networks through the use of the publishing mechanisms in the system. Okay. I think we have time for one or two more. And we're just going through here to make sure we get the list. The last question is just came in. It's sort of related to this API question. That's looking also about what are some of the free options and the open source options to make content in a Percussion site available via these APIs. So this is a good thing to understand too. When you look at the technologies largely are either standards like RDFA, so there's not even a technology stack you have to go use, or they are free open source solutions like, let's say, the Lucene search mechanism can be used in concert with the way things are tagged to make it available through an API, or syndication standards that move content around. There's different ones and different technology stacks that can do that. And so, in fact, that's exactly what we do today. So in some of our partners have done taxonomy management extensions where they're using these sort of open source software stacks, basically, and there's a whole variety of different ones. So you've got things like Lucene, you've got things, different syndication standards, messaging standards, and stacks for that you can tack on. You've also got presentation standards. So there's standard open source device detection libraries. Aids.gov, we're using those. The names of all of these, it's kind of an alphabet soup out there, are so many, really. The real challenge is, again, the complexity of trying to figure out which is the right one to use. Generally speaking, we recommend you think about it in terms of where you run your technology center. So are you running in kind of a Java environment, a LAMP stack, and then based on that, from there you figure out, all right, well, we're doing LAMP, so we want the PHP version of device detection and not the Java one. Other people are going, we're running everything in a Java container, so we'll go grab that. And that's what will help folks do. But basically, all these technologies wrap around the content that you're generating in these sites. And generally speaking, once you tag it the right way and you publish it out as either XML or in some of these other formats, it really will work with all those different ones that are already out there. The other key thing to think about is it's not just your adoption yourself as a content owner and distributor of this information. Other people are going to want to adopt their own. So you really need to think about not just what open source technology do we use to make our content available in an open API, but how do we open it up and tag it so that anybody else, maybe somebody else is they're running a LAMP stack on their site, you're running Java on yours, you don't want to be limiting in that regard. So if you think about physically transferring, publishing the information out of the CMS, then those other participants don't need to learn CMS APIs. They don't need how to write a driver for that system. They can simply use the standard tagging that you've done. They can use the XML markup that you've done and get at the content that way rather than connecting to the system. So I realize, by the way, it was kind of a high-level answer. I want to throw a couple of examples out there, but there's just mountains of different live code libraries and things out there. We use a lot of them ourselves. For example, our own native API stack, I can tell you this. We're using, the latest, greatest NoSQL system as a data store. for the API calls themselves, the MongoDB, and things like Node.js for your stack. So and this is back to that whole technology change. No matter what you use, there's always something neat that we want to roll in, and so that's a key part of what we do as a vendor in this space as well.
Thank you, Vern. So we're just about out of time. Thank you for everyone for joining us today. Hope you found this presentation valuable. You will be able to see the slides and video recording of this at www.percussion.com. So feel free to take a look if you missed anything. Thanks again for joining us, and talk to you soon.